So hey, it's Kevin Wade today and Chris Hurley with intellisystems, and going to talk a little bit about backup and disaster recovery. Chris is our technical manager, and so your system and your data are finally installed and they're configured perfectly. So how do we make sure it's there when we need it? Well, how does a backup and disaster recovery, what does it look like? What gets backed up? And Chris, you go in a lot of times when we have new clients that that we start working with, and tell me a little bit about kind of what you find when you go to these customers.
Well, I find it kind of falls into a couple of different categories. The most common one is, unfortunately, that what is there has never worked ever.
Okay, that's the worst of all situations.
It is, basically. Somebody might have installed something, but they never bothered to check it, so it never worked. One of the other things that's common that we find is that it used to work for a while but then stopped, and it might be that maybe somebody's credit card expired and so the product stopped working. Since nobody was checking, they never knew. And then we'll find where maybe it is working, but it's only kind of backing up a small subset of what's necessary and is really not enough to recover from a disaster. But then the least common thing that we find is that everything is backing up correctly, it's working, and it's comprehensive enough that we could use it.
Yeah, and because a lot of times customers are simply backing up the data, and if they had some situation where the file server fails, they'd still have to go back, and a vendor like us would have to fix the hardware, then install the operating system, install the different programs they may use on their server, and then join all their workstations to the network. Basically the same things you would go through in the original network install that they probably paid thousands of dollars for. All that's got to be done over again, and in a lot of cases they're down for a day or two, and they don't realize that even though you may have a backup of data, if they do, that it's still going to be days of downtime.
That's right, and that was something when we talked to customers to try to set expectations. When we went through that process and said, hey, what were you expecting? And we went through these steps that you talked about basically bringing everything back from scratch. And we said this can take, it's not unusual for it to take a couple of days, even on a small network, and people just kind of turn green. They obviously weren't comfortable with it, and we said, well, what were you expecting? And they said, an hour or two, if anything.
So the ideal thing, obviously, is to have something that's maybe image-based, that's got a local component that backs up the server, the workstation, the server, maybe in some cases workstations, but mainly the server, all the operating system, all the applications, all the data, and then could be restored within an hour or less, or hour or two or less would be ideal. And of course, again, that depends on what the customer's expectation is, right?
That's correct.
Some are happy with being down a couple of days. It wouldn't be a big deal, but some have told us like no time. So and it ranges anywhere between that.
Sure. And there are a lot of techniques that we can use, as far as the technology goes. But the first step really is for us to identify what's important. Every business is different, and so when we work with the business owner or the management and figure out what are the things that are vital to them to kind of understand their world, and then from there determine what their expectations are in terms of their business. Can they be down for a couple of days? I've had a church tell me before that if we were down for a week, it wouldn't be a problem. We just couldn't print our bulletin. But then in another business, they would say if we're down for an hour, we have lost tens of thousands of dollars. So understanding kind of that time frame of what it would be, what would work for them is important. Identifying what are the steps that we can use to make sure that it works, and then what is our plan B. And then for us, I think, as a technician, what's plan C, plan D, how many levels can we go reasonably to make sure they're taken care of.
Exactly. Again, a saying that we have around intellisystems is backup is not a product, it's a process. And of course, there are some things that do not work, right, Chris?
Yeah, we see a lot of different things that work. The one thing I found doesn't work: the backup fairy.
Yeah.
We waited. She never comes. Another popular thing is just kind of assuming that somebody else is taking care of it, and just kind of turn a blind eye and not put anything actually into ensuring that it is.
Ignoring the issue and just hoping that it goes away.
Just kind of putting that on the list for next week, and next week never comes. Assuming that you just probably won't ever have a problem. A lot of people say, we've never had a problem, in 2 years it's been fine. Everything's been okay. So by that extension, we'll never have a problem.
Right.
I haven't had a car wreck in a while, so I probably never will. And then lastly, and this is probably, I think, the most dangerous one really is just assuming that when we have a problem that somehow we'll figure out a way through it and it'll be okay. And without really going through the steps to say, well, what would that look like? What are the steps going to be? We'll wing it when we get there.
Yeah. So in your business, maybe some questions to ask would be what?
Well, the first thing probably is what's being backed up. I mean, specifically, what are the individual pieces of data, the important systems, as far as like the accounting software, each of those things, what are we actually backing up?
And is that backup working today?
Correct. I mean, is it actually working today?
And how long would it take to get everything back and usable?
Correct. And when was the last time we actually tried it?
Yeah. And who's responsible for making sure too that you could get it back?
I think that's a big one, because most of the time it's always somebody else, and it turns out that nobody knows really who it is.
We had a client where a lady was supposed to swap tapes on the older traditional tape backup system, and she was let go, and 6 months later they realized nobody had taken on that responsibility when the server died, of course. So again, a reason why you want this backup and disaster recovery, and kind of take it out of the hands and make sure that somebody is really watching it. And I guess too, when was the last fire drill?
I think that's really important, to make sure that somebody actually has gone through the steps. I find a lot of times people assume that it was tested, but when you actually drill down into it, you find that there has never been a fire drill. Nobody knows for sure that it works. What
is the plan if you actually had that fire or flood or some other issue that shut the business down? Because the statistics say 40% of businesses that have some data loss, some substantial data loss, don't survive. So again, talking about backup and disaster recovery today, Chris Hurley, Kevin Wade with intellisystems. Hope you got a little something out of that, and we'll see you next time.